Regular viewers may be familiar with my particular opinion on the trope of bipedal combat robots that seems so popular with you humies. But the TL on that DR for the rest of y'all is they're dumb. There's basically no reason to do a strictly bipedal combat robot structure thing aside from big stompy robots, and in which case you should use more legs or be at least more interesting in your designs aside from always vaguely humanoid. For example, I have absolutely no problems with the MT-AT from Star Wars, I guess now expanded universe. It's a very purpose-built craft that does its job very well. But it's not stupid enough to confine itself to being a large, hulking, bipedal, bi-armed, one-headed, one-torsoed, humanoid stompy robot. But said stompy robots are very popular with y'all, so I occasionally talk about them. I'm not doing that this episode. I'm going to start talking about them, and then I'm going to do something else. You'll see. Any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards. And naturally, one of the most popular arenas, venues, universes for the bipedal stompy combat robot gestalt is, of course, BattleTech, or MechWarrior. We've been over the naming differences. It's not a big deal. Just understand that they are both referring to basically the same universe. But the annoying thing about BattleTech is that apparently everyone always seems to forget that it is technically a combined arms universe. Yes, big stompy robots. But there's other vehicles and vessels and stuff, too. But no, big stompy robots. We gotta play with big stompy robots. That's all there is. Big stompy robots. Bah! Yeah, okay. If you want to limit yourself in that fashion, I suppose you can. But we're gonna talk about something else this episode after I talk about a big stompy robot. Actually, it's not actually that big. It's one of the smallest battle mechs in existence, weighing in at a mere 20 tons, and again, as I have spoken about previously, I have no idea what tons they're using in this particular case. Apparently Stellar League tons are possibly an option or a thing. Just roll with it and ignore the particular details and the numbers. Regardless, this particular 20-ton pipsqueak is known as a Locust, and on top of being one of the smallest mechs ever built, it is also one of the fastest mechs ever built. It can top out somewhere in the neighborhood of 129 kilometers per hour. For those of y'all using Freedom units, that's approximately 80 miles an hour. Yes, this thing runs at 80 miles an hour. From what I understand, that is faster than a significant number of the many-laned roads that crisscross your North American continent. Or, at least, it's faster than the signs say you should go. I have no idea how fast y'all actually go, and you probably shouldn't admit to it, so it doesn't really matter. As you might imagine, that speed at that weight comes at a cost. It has basically no armor. This thing is not designed to stand and fight. Even though it is technically armed with one medium laser and 2 machine guns. It's mostly meant for hit-and-run attacks against, well, other light vehicles, or infantry, or buildings, or just, scouting and using those guns to fend off anything that might come for it. Because after all, it does have a fairly decent communications array and sensor suite. So, anyways, like I said, this is pretty much representative of the tiny spectrum of mechs. And it costs somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 million C-bills. For those not familiar with the verse, C-bill is a short term for Comstar dollar, basically. And Comstar, well, they're probably worthy of an episode by themselves, but suffice to say they're kind of like the Spacing Guild from Dune, only worse somehow. And they control all of the faster-than-light communications in the BattleTech universe. So the C-bill is basically a standardized currency based on how much it costs to send a minute or a second or whatever a transmission burst through their hyperpulse generators. I don't know the specific conversion ratios. It's really irrelevant to the conversation. Anyways, one Locust runs you about 1.5 million C-bills. So that's pretty much where we're going to start the conversation. Because for about 92,000 C-bills, a certain company by the name of S.L. Lewis Incorporated would like to sell you something. Naturally, the S.L. Lewis Incorporated company is named after none other than Warrant Officer Samuel Lawrence Lewis, who, along with the rest of the crew on the merchant-class jump ship Winnetka, stumbled across some Lost Tech cache in the year about 3017, give or take a little. And yes, that is on your calendar, in fact. BattleTech is a little optimistic about how far out in space you'll be in about 1,000 years. And yes, Lost Tech is exactly what it sounds like. It is tech from approximately the Star League era of time in the BattleTech timeline, which was about from 2570 to 2780. After 2780, unfortunately, there was something called the Succession Wars, which were an absolute mess. The wars lasted almost 300 years, and in fact were still going on when Mr. Lewis stumbled across his interesting pieces of technology that, yes, had been lost to the war, basically. The information, the knowledge of how to make them had been destroyed, had been separated from civilization. Kind of sounds like 40K and their Age of Strife, and all of the technology that the 40K has, that they know that if they push this button, it does this thing, but they have no idea how. Well, thankfully, the BattleTech universe does not have the nigh-religious blockage of examining technology and reverse engineering it and rebuilding it. Otherwise, the story I'm about to tell you could not have happened. What did happen is that the crew of the Winnetka decided to divvy up the Lost Tech stash that they found amongst themselves, which makes a certain degree of sense. I mean, finders keepers, right? And Lewis himself claimed more than 2,000 Omni-25 fusion engines, which were basically ridiculously small, ridiculously efficient fusion engines. And for those who are unclear on the topic, fusion engines are exactly what they sound like and are predominantly used for mechs. However, Mr. Lewis showed a small degree of self-awareness and self-preservation, and instead of simply offloading those 2,000 engines and retiring to a comfortable life based off the funds that he would accumulate off that alone, he held on to them. And then the Lyran Commonwealth put out a call for proposals for a new combat vehicle specifically designed for reconnaissance work. Mr. Lewis sat himself down at a drafting table for a few years and incorporated his business as the S.L. Lewis Incorporated, probably hired a few engineers and so forth and so on, bright bulbs and all that, this, that, and the other. And in a few years, the Savannah Master was born. In fact, it was not only born, it was heartily adopted by the Lyran Commonwealth and the Federated Suns. And between those two governmental organizations, they controlled nearly 800 solar systems. So yeah, this thing got popular. In fact, it got so popular that he had to give his last 10 Omni-25 engines to a certain company by the name of Edisich Motors, who after a few years were finally able to reverse engineer the technology and produce the Edisich Omni-25, which was basically identical to the original Omni-25 fusions that he found on that Lost Tech cache. In fact, that engine got so popular that he was shoving it into everything from a heavy hover APC to a slipper hover car, because it was just small enough and just powerful enough to do what it needed to do. But S.L. Lewis Incorporated's bread and butter would remain the Savannah Master for basically its entire existence as a company. Which I guess brings us to the question of, all right, what the hell is a Savannah Master? Well, it's a sufficient pain in the ass that it has been successfully banned from a number of friendly games and corporate games and local game store games. Yeah. Why? Well, like I said, first of all, it only costs 92,000 C-bills. That Locust thing that we were talking about cost 1.5 million. So yeah, you can field 16 Savannah Masters for the same price as a single Locust. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere interesting. Why is that such a problem? Well, remember how we mentioned that the Locust was armed with one medium laser and two machine guns, at least in its base form? That thing was modified probably more than the cloak shape in Star Wars. So I'm just going with the base model for the Locust. I'm not going to talk about any rest of them. Well, the Savannah Master in his base form, and there were technically at least 4 variations on that base form, but we're going to talk about the base form just first. In its base form, carried one medium laser. That's it. Oh, I'm starting to see a problem. For the same price as a mech, with one medium laser, you can suddenly have 16 medium lasers on the table. Oh no. But it gets worse. as you probably have figured out by now, this in fact is not a mech. It is a hovercraft. And I say hovercraft in the terms that are applicable on your planet right now. Because as far as I can tell, BattleTech doesn't have any kind of gravitic manipulation technology at all. It doesn't have anti-gravity, it doesn't have artificial gravity, it doesn't have any of that. What they do have are big rubber skirts and a big fan, just like the hovercraft on your planet right now. And the primary benefit of those big rubber skirts and big fans is that the Savannah Master tops out at approximately 216 kilometers per hour. Yes, you heard that right, 216, as compared to the Locust at 129. Oh boy. Now once again, the speed, just like the Locust, came at a price. The Locust carried, again in its base model, 4 tons of armor out of its 20 total tons. Well, the Savannah Master weighs in total at 5 tons. It has basically no armor at all. It can be destroyed by a mech sneezing at it. But that's not where it shines. See, the name Savannah Master is kind of weird, right? There's a reason for that. The way that the Savannah Master craft was chosen by the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces was they started out with 3 weeks of beating the vehicle senseless, basically. Tests and trials and tribulations meant to see if it would break down, fail, so on and so forth. But really, what really sold it was the last event of the Shindig, where in a simulated battle, in a series of simulated battles, in that they were real live vehicles on a battlefield, but using simunitions, basically, the Savannah Master, although it wasn't called that quite yet, was put up against none other than a mech warrior and a Locust. And this particular mech warrior was very, very good at what she did. So, naturally, she was the selection to see if this craft would be good enough to stand up to her. She lost 12 times in a row. That's when she got pissed off. After 15 repeated losses, Mr. Lewis actually started making fun of her, which seems a little unsporting, but still, him and his little hovercraft was basically just poning her because she just couldn't target the damn thing. It was strictly faster and strictly more maneuverable, and it would simply get behind her mech and just start chewing away at her stern armor. Oh, sure, it might take a while, but he would zip behind her, get a few shots off, zip away, zip behind her, get a few shots off, zip away, and just keep doing that over and over and over again, courtesy of that stupid little fusion power plant that he used. And this is one of the joys and horrors of hovercraft on your planet or anywhere else. They're basically like hockey pucks, as long as they're under power. You can't exactly park a hovercraft on cushion on the side of a hill, because it will slide down the hill. But as long as you have very good vectored thrust, and as long as you're basically moving around and mindful of where inertia will take you if you're not moving around, then they are astonishingly maneuverable. They're kind of like the Star Furies in Babylon 5, where they can get accelerated going one way, twist themselves around, keep going the original direction, and start shooting you. Which is what basically Lewis did. Unfortunately, his taunts were successful enough that by the time of the 17th fight, the mech warrior in question had had enough of his very large mouth and activated live munitions. The simulated fight suddenly became a real fight, which she lost. And she only survived because of the auto-injection system when her Locust ammunition stores went up in big boom. And since the mech warrior's name was Savannah Johnson, she forever got saddled with the reality that there was going to be a vehicle out there in the universe called a Savannah Master. Ouch. And basically that behavior is why it is banned from so many games. Apparently it can move 20 hexes per turn and just keep getting behind light mechs and just gnawing away at their armor. And zip around, gnaw. And armor or no armor, it's just hard to track and hard to engage. But don't worry, Mr. Lewis wasn't one to settle for good enough, even though good enough in this case was moderately terrifying for most mech warriors. Instead, there was the variant called the SL Sierra Lima. They swapped out the medium laser for 2 small lasers. Although this one wasn't really built that much because it didn't have enough range. Fair enough. Then there was the Interdictor. This thing took out its entire weapon system and replaced it with a Guardian ECM suite. It was basically a mobile jammer. Okay. Moves fast, hard to pin down, constantly screws up communication. I see the appeal. Then there was the skimmer, which mounts a larger fusion engine. And instead of the medium laser, it mounts a small laser and a flamer. This one was actually pursued, though, because it was really, really good against infantry. Yeah. Imagine a 216 kilometer per hour fireball coming at you. That wouldn't be a good time. And then there's my personal favorite, which took the Duralex light armor and replaced it with Bowie glinting blade reflective armor, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's specifically engineered against energy weapons and not so great against ballistic weapons. But in addition to the armor swap out, it swapped the medium laser for an extended range medium laser. Oh yeah, that thing must be a pain in the butt. So I don't know. Are 16 Savannah Masters going to bring down a direwolf? Of course not. But then a Locust isn't going to bring down a direwolf either. But there's one big difference. Can the direwolf target and hit the Locust? Possibly. Can the direwolf hit or even target or even track a single one of the 16 Savannah Masters? Probably not. So while your big stompy things are doing big stompy things out there in the big stompy field, these silly little, I don't know, trash cans floating on a trash bag are zipping right past them, destroying your logistics train, blowing up your communications repeaters, and knocking out your air defense systems, and then zipping back out again before anyone ever knew what was going on. And all that at a terrifyingly small fraction of the price of an actual mech. Now, there is one interesting detail that I should point out before we sign off. On your planet as it stands right now, combat fixed-wing aircraft, for every hour they spend in flight, they spend approximately 5 hours in maintenance. Give or take a little, it varies on the aircraft. This is a rounded number across all manner of aircraft, so just take it as a general-purpose scale of information. The next scale that you should consider is rotary-winged aircraft, that is to say helicopters. For every hour they spend in the air, they spend approximately 10 hours in maintenance. Hovercraft of the big fans and big rubber bag variety, not the anti-grav variety, but actual hovercraft, like the LCAC that your USA and Navy uses, the landing craft air cushion. For every hour that it spends technically in the air, because the frame of it is not touching the ground, the rubber bag is, but details. For every hour it spends in the air, it has to undergo 25 hours of maintenance. Where do big, stompy, bipedal combat robots fall into this scale? I have no idea. But it is something to think about. And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.